The crystalline walls of the Galactic Council chambers stretched upward into darkness. Ambassador Marcus Williams sat in the human delegation's seats, watching the holographic displays that floated above the central platform. 847 species had representatives in this room. The chamber was so large that the far walls disappeared into a shimmering haze. Today's session had dragged on for 6 hours. Williams had stopped counting the items on the agenda. His assistant, Elena Park, sat beside him with her datapad, tracking the votes. She leaned close and whispered, "They're bringing up the frontier defense allocation next." Williams nodded. He had known this was coming. For months, whispers had traveled through the diplomatic corridors. Species that saw Earth's independent military as redundant. Species that thought humans held too tightly to their weapons and warships. The voice of the council speaker boomed through the chamber, translated instantly into every known language. Councillor Thexnar of the Krell stepped forward. The insectoid's multiple legs clicked against the stone floor as it approached the speaking platform. Its translator device glowed at its throat. "Honored members of the council," Thexnar began, "we face a growing threat from beyond our galaxy. The Void Swarm advances. We must unite our resources and eliminate wasteful redundancy." Williams felt his jaw tighten. He knew where this was going. "I propose," Thexnar continued, "that we redirect defense funds from species maintaining independent military forces. These outdated structures drain resources that could strengthen our unified fleet. Specifically, I refer to the human military apparatus." A murmur rippled through the chamber. Some delegates shifted in their seats. Others activated their translation devices to confirm they had heard correctly. Williams remained still. Elena touched his arm. "Ambassador, we should request speaking time." "Not yet," Williams said quietly. Thexnar's voice grew stronger. "Humanity clings to primitive notions of sovereignty. They refuse to fully integrate into our collective defense structure. Why should council resources fund their stubbornness? Other species have evolved beyond such territorial thinking." Laughter echoed from several sections of the chamber. The Zorvian delegation clicked their mandibles in amusement. The Praxian representatives made high-pitched sounds that their translators rendered as mocking agreement. Williams pressed the button on his console. "Request to speak." The council speaker looked at the cue display and continued without acknowledging the request. This was the third session where Williams had been denied floor recognition. The pattern was clear now. They had no intention of letting him speak. The vote was called. Species after species indicated their position. The holographic tally rose above the platform. 731 in favor, 89 against, 27 abstentions. The motion passed. Earth would lose its defense appropriations. The human fleet would receive no support for maintenance, no access to council technology sharing, no backup in case of attack. Humanity had just been told to disarm or pay for everything alone. Williams sat in the silence that followed the vote. Around him, delegates were already moving to the next item on the agenda, business as usual. Elena looked at him, waiting for instructions. He stood up. The movement was slow, deliberate. He gathered the datapad from his desk. He picked up the ceremonial human flag that stood beside his seat. Elena watched him, confusion crossing her face. Then understanding dawned. "Pack everything," Williams said quietly. "We're leaving." The human delegation began collecting their materials. 37 staff members moved in coordinated silence. They disconnected their equipment from the council network. They gathered documents, removed personal items from their offices. Not a single person spoke above a whisper. The chamber noticed. Conversations faltered. Delegates turned to watch the humans preparing to leave. The council speaker paused in the middle of announcing the next agenda item. Williams walked toward the main exit. His staff followed behind him in a quiet procession. Their footsteps echoed in the suddenly silent chamber. 846 species watched them go. As Williams reached the threshold, Thexnar's voice called out, "Ambassador Williams, are you leaving? Running home to sulk because you lost a vote?" Williams stopped. He did not turn around immediately. When he did, his face showed no anger, no frustration, just a calm that somehow felt more final than any rage. "We're done," Williams said. His voice was quiet, but every translation device in the chamber picked it up clearly. "Good luck." He turned and walked out. The human delegation followed. The doors closed behind them with a soft hiss. In the chamber, silence stretched for several seconds. Then nervous laughter broke out from a few delegations. The Krell counselors clicked their approval. The Praxians made dismissive gestures. They will return, Thexanar announced. Humans are emotional creatures. They make dramatic gestures. Give them a few days to calm down. The council speaker resumed the session. The next item was called for debate. The empty seats in the human section were ignored. After all, delegations walked out occasionally. They always came back. Everyone knew that. Outside the chamber, Williams led his delegation to the transport bay. His communications officer approached him with a tablet. Sir, we're receiving queries from other delegations. They want to know if we're coming back for tomorrow's session. Send the same message to everyone, Williams said. The human delegation has concluded its participation in the Galactic Council. We thank the Council for the past 50 years of cooperation. That's it? Elena asked. No explanation? No demands? They made their decision, Williams said. They decided we're redundant. They decided we're primitive. They decided we don't deserve a voice, so we're giving them what they want. A council without humanity. The transport lifted off from the diplomatic platform. Williams looked back at the crystalline structure one last time. 50 years of human presence in that building. 50 years of trying to be good partners, good neighbors, good members of the galactic community. It had not been enough. The transport accelerated toward the jump point that would take them back to human space. Behind them, the council continued its session. The votes continued. The debates went on. The galaxy kept turning, but something had changed. Something that would not be understood until much later. Humanity had walked away, and they would not be coming back. 3 months passed. The council chambers felt strangely empty despite being full. The human seats remained vacant. At first, delegates walked past them without notice. Then someone placed a temporary marker there, expecting replacement representatives. The marker remained. No one came. Junior analyst Sephira of the Avian Collective noticed the silence first. Her job involved tracking communication patterns between council members and their home governments. She sat in her small office in the administrative wing, watching data streams flow across her screens. Human channels had gone dark, not offline, not broken, simply silent. No responses to trade requests. No acknowledgement of diplomatic messages, nothing. She brought it to her supervisor's attention. The humans are not responding to any communications, she reported. Her supervisor, a veteran Praxian administrator, waved a dismissive appendage. They are sulking. Give them time. They will come around when they need something. But Sephira kept watching the patterns. Trade ships that normally docked at human ports were being turned away. Not aggressively. The human port authorities sent polite automated messages redirecting vessels to alternative markets in neutral space. The ports themselves showed no signs of distress or damage. They simply were not accepting visitors. Human colonies across the frontier stopped responding to council communications. The settlements were still there. Sensor readings showed normal activity, power signatures, ship movements, life. But when anyone tried to contact them, they received the same automated response. Thank you for your message. Humanity has withdrawn from galactic affairs. Please direct all future inquiries to neutral intermediaries. The message included a list of independent trading posts and communication relays, places where humans were apparently willing to do business, but only through third parties. They were not cutting off all contact. They were simply refusing direct engagement with council species. Reports began filtering in from across the galaxy. Human merchants who had operated shops and businesses on alien worlds were closing down and leaving. Human engineers who had worked at major shipyards were resigning and returning home. Human scientists at research stations were requesting transfers back to human space. It was not a sudden evacuation. There was no panic, no emergency. People simply finished their contracts, packed their belongings, said polite goodbyes, and left. When asked why, they gave vague answers about family obligations or career changes, but the pattern was clear. Humanity was withdrawing. The Council sent an official envoy to Earth. Ambassador Velcor of the Centaurian hegemony led the delegation. He was an experienced diplomat, having served for over 100 years. He had negotiated the Prax-Zenth peace accords. He had resolved the Kaldor trade disputes. Surely he could smooth over this misunderstanding with the humans. His ship arrived at the edge of the Sol system. Automated defense platforms activated immediately. They did not power weapons. They simply moved into position and transmitted a message. This system is closed to Galactic Council vessels. Please turn back. If you have urgent business, submit a request through neutral intermediaries. Velcor activated his diplomatic credentials. This is Ambassador Velcor on official council business. I request permission to proceed to Earth for diplomatic talks. The automated response came immediately. Access denied. Diplomatic relations between humanity and the Galactic Council have been terminated. This decision is final. Velcor tried again. I wish to speak with Ambassador Williams or other human officials. Ambassador Williams has retired. There are no human officials assigned to council relations. Submit any messages through neutral intermediaries. The defense platforms did not move. They simply waited. After an hour of attempting different approaches, Velcor gave the order to withdraw. His ship returned to council space without ever speaking to a single human being. His report to the council was brief. Humans were not responding to diplomatic overtures. They were not hostile, but they were completely closed to direct contact. They had meant what they said. They were done. Councillor Thexnar addressed the council after hearing the report. This is a temporary situation, Thexnar insisted. They need us more than we need them. When the reality of isolation sets in, they will reconsider. We simply need to be patient. But cracks were already appearing in the council's infrastructure. The Tarvian Confederation reported problems with their communication network. The system had been operating perfectly for decades, but now errors were appearing. Messages were being lost. Connections were dropping. Their technical staff could not identify the problem. A human engineer had designed their network. A human maintenance team had kept it running. Those engineers had left 3 months ago. No one else understood the system well enough to fix it. The Zorvian Mining Collective reported similar issues. Their automated extraction systems were malfunctioning. Output had dropped by 30%. The systems were human-made, human-maintained. The Zorvians had never bothered to learn how they worked. Why would they? The humans had always been there to fix problems. Now the humans were gone. Trade routes began experiencing disruptions. Ships were taking longer routes to avoid empty human ports. Supply chains that had relied on human manufacturing centers were scrambling to find alternatives. The alternatives were more expensive, less efficient, and harder to coordinate. Saphira compiled reports from across the galaxy. The pattern was undeniable. Humanity had been integrated into galactic society more deeply than anyone had realized. They had not been guests or junior partners. They had been foundational medical technology. Humans had developed treatments for cross-species diseases. The treatments were still available through neutral markets, but at much higher prices and with no technical support. Agricultural systems. Humans had solved the Tarn food crisis 15 years ago. Now the Tarn were requesting emergency aid because their enhanced crops were failing, and no one knew how to fix them. Communication protocols. The backbone of the Council's translation network used human-designed algorithms. The system still worked, but without human maintenance, small errors were accumulating. Manufacturing. Human factories produced 40% of the Starship components used across Council space. Those factories were now only accepting orders from non-Council species. Saphira took her findings to her supervisor again. "We have a serious problem," she said. Humanity was not a minor participant in our society. They were everywhere, and now they are gone. Her supervisor looked at the data. For the first time, concern showed in his expression. "Compile a full report. Present it to the Council." Saphira worked for 2 weeks preparing the report. She documented every system that was failing, every supply chain that was disrupted, every critical service that humans had provided without recognition or credit. The report was presented to the Council. Most delegates listened politely and dismissed the concerns. The problems were temporary. Other species would fill the gaps. This was simply an adjustment period. Thexnar spoke with absolute confidence. "We will contact humanity. We will offer concessions. Better terms for trade. Restoration of their defense funding. They are not fools. They will return." The Council sent official delegations to every neutral intermediary that humans were using. The message was simple. "We wish to restore diplomatic relations. We are prepared to negotiate. Please facilitate contact with human authorities." The responses came back within days. All identical. Humanity appreciates the Council's message. However, humanity has withdrawn from galactic affairs. This decision is final. Humanity will continue trade through neutral parties and will maintain peaceful relations with all species. But there will be no direct diplomatic engagement with the Galactic Council. We respect your decision to exclude us from your defense structure. Please respect our decision to exclude ourselves from your political structure. The message was polite. It was professional. It was also completely inflexible. 6 months after humanity's departure, the first real crisis hit. The Void Swarm reached the outer colonies. Apraxian settlement sent desperate calls for help. The Council fleet responded, but coordination was poor. Ships arrived late. Communication breakdowns led to tactical errors. The colony was evacuated, but barely. Analysis of the disaster revealed the truth. The Council's military coordination system relied on human-designed software. Without human engineers to maintain it, the system was deteriorating. Updates were not being properly installed. Compatibility errors were appearing between different species ships. The Council had built their unified fleet on a human foundation. Now that foundation was gone, and the structure was beginning to crack. In her small office, Saphira looked at the latest reports and felt a cold understanding settle over her. They had not just lost humanity's participation. They had lost the invisible infrastructure that had allowed the Council to function smoothly. The humans had been the engineers maintaining the machinery of galactic civilization. Everyone had assumed those engineers were replaceable, that their work was simple, that any species could do what they did. They had been wrong. And now the machinery was breaking down, piece by piece in the silence humanity had left behind. The Void Swarm came like a storm from the dark between galaxies. 6 months after humanity's departure, the first major wave hit the Kaldor Reach. Thousands of organic ships, pulsing with alien biology, descended on the outer colonies. The Council Defense Forces responded according to protocol. 3 fleets converged on the attack zone. The battle was a disaster. Fleet coordination broke down within the first hour. The Zorvian battle cruisers could not communicate properly with the Praxian destroyers. The Krell carriers received targeting data too late to be useful. Ships collided trying to form defensive formations. Orders were misunderstood. The careful battle plans dissolved into chaos. By the time the fighting ended, the Council had lost 37 ships and failed to stop the swarm advance. The colonies were evacuated in emergency conditions. Millions of refugees fled toward the core systems. The military analysis came quickly. The coordination software had multiple critical failures. Systems that had worked flawlessly for decades were now producing errors. The investigation revealed the cause within days. Human engineers had maintained the military communication network. The base code was human-designed. The regular updates and patches were human-written. The compatibility layers that allowed different species systems to talk to each other were human-created. For 50 years, humans had been quietly keeping the Council fleet operational. No one had noticed because it had always simply worked. Now the humans were gone and the cracks were showing. Saphira's second report went to the High Council immediately. This time they could not dismiss it. The military command demanded answers. How had they become so dependent on a single species without realizing it? Saphira stood before the assembled council leaders and presented her findings. The problem is systematic, she explained. Humans integrated themselves into galactic infrastructure at every level. Not through any conspiracy or plan, simply because they were good at solving problems and we kept asking them to solve more. She displayed charts showing the scope of human involvement. Military communications, trade logistics, medical technology, agricultural systems, manufacturing standards, research protocols, educational frameworks. They were never just participants, Saphira continued. They became the foundation, and we built higher and higher without recognizing what we were standing on. Admiral Corvin of the Centaurian military spoke up. Can we replicate their systems? Surely we have the technical specifications. We have documentation, Saphira replied, but implementation is complex. Human systems are designed with assumptions and optimizations that made sense to human engineers. Other species struggle to understand the reasoning. It would take years to fully replicate what they built, and we do not have years. The swarm is not waiting. The economic reports were equally devastating. Galactic trade had contracted by 18%. Major supply chains had collapsed entirely. Food shortages were developing in systems that had relied on human agricultural technology. Medical facilities reported critical shortages of equipment and treatments. The Council had not just lost a diplomatic partner, they had lost the invisible workers who had kept civilization running smoothly. Councillor Thexnar stood to address the Council. The insectoid's confidence had diminished noticeably since the disaster at Caldor Reach. "We must contact humanity again," Thexnar said. "Offer them anything they want. Full restoration of defense funding, voting privileges, whatever it takes to bring them back." Matriarch Velkos, the eldest member of the Council, spoke for the first time in months. Her telepathic voice resonated in every mind present. "They will not come back for concessions. We insulted them. We treated them as primitive when they were sophisticated. We called them redundant when they were essential. Why would they forgive that?" "They need us too," Thexnar insisted. "They cannot stand alone against the swarm, can they not?" Velkos asked quietly. Intelligence reports about human space were sparse. Humans were not accepting Council observers. But sensor data from the border regions told an interesting story. Human colonies were not fleeing from the frontier. They were fortifying. Ship production in human space had increased significantly. New defense platforms were being constructed. The humans were preparing for war, but not the Council's war. Their own war. They were building their defenses and ignoring everything happening outside their borders. Desperate delegations were sent to the neutral intermediaries again. This time the message was more humble. "We made a mistake. We need your help. Please reconsider." The response was the same as before, polite, professional, inflexible. Humanity had withdrawn. The decision was final. The swarm pushed deeper into Council space. More colonies fell. The refugee crisis worsened. Council fleets engaged the enemy again and again, achieving limited success. The coordination problems persisted. Every battle revealed new systemic failures. Economic collapse accelerated. Species that had prospered for centuries found themselves struggling with basic resource management. The smooth flow of goods and services that everyone had taken for granted was gone. In its place was chaos, inefficiency, and scarcity. Saphira worked 18-hour days trying to find solutions. Her team analyzed human systems, trying to understand how they could be maintained or replaced. The task felt impossible. For every problem they solved, 3 more appeared. One evening, exhausted and frustrated, she reviewed the timeline of human involvement in the Council. 50 years of contributions. 50 years of humans quietly solving problems, improving systems, making things work better, never demanding credit, never seeking recognition. Just doing good work because they were good at it, and the Council had taken it all for granted. She found records of debates from decades past. Humans proposing improvements to various systems. Other species dismissing their ideas as too complicated or unnecessary. But then, quietly, implementing modified versions of those same ideas a few years later. Records of human scientists whose research had been published under other species' names. Human engineers whose innovations had been credited to their alien supervisors. Human diplomats who had negotiated peace agreements while other species took credit for the success. The pattern was clear and shameful. Humanity had been systematically undervalued and overlooked. Their contributions had been treated as obligations rather than gifts. Their expertise had been exploited rather than respected. Saphira compiled all of this into a report. Not for the Council. For herself. Because she needed to understand how such a massive failure of recognition had occurred. The answer was simple and terrible. Humans had been too helpful, too willing to assist, too quiet about their own value. They had done important work without demanding acknowledgement. And everyone had assumed that meant the work was not important. 3 more Council worlds fell to the swarm. Billions evacuated. The defense lines continued to collapse. Every day brought new reports of system failures, resource shortages, coordination breakdowns. Matriarch Velkos called for an emergency session. She stood before the Council, 600 years of wisdom weighing in her voice. "We failed," she said simply. "Not in battle. Not in strategy. We failed in character. We had partners who gave everything to help us succeed. And we treated them as servants. We accepted their sacrifices as obligations. We took their gifts and offered no gratitude." The chamber was silent. "We cannot undo this mistake," Velkos continued. "We can only acknowledge it and learn from it. If we survive this crisis, we must become better. We must recognize value before it leaves. We must respect contribution before we lose it. She transmitted a formal apology to humanity through every neutral channel, a public acknowledgement of the Council's failure, an admission of what had been lost, a plea not for return but simply for understanding. The response came 3 days later. A video message. Ambassador Williams appeared on screen, older now, tired. He sat in a simple office, a window behind him showing Earth's blue sky. Matriarch Velkos, Williams began. I have read your message. Your words are honest and appreciated, but you would never have spoken them if you were not losing. You did not respect us when you had power. Why would we believe you respect us now that you need us? He paused, looking directly at the camera. Humanity will survive this. We have faced extinction before. We have survived ice ages, plagues, wars, disasters. We learned long ago how to endure. Whether you survive, that is your challenge now. We wish you no harm, but we cannot fight your battles for you. Not anymore. The message ended. In the council chambers, the weight of true understanding finally settled. They had not just lost humanity's help. They had lost humanity's trust. And trust, once broken completely, could not be repaired with apologies or concessions. The swarm continued its advance. The council prepared for a long, desperate war, and humanity watched from behind their borders, helping refugees, maintaining trade with neutral parties, but otherwise silent. The silence that had seemed like temporary anger was revealed as permanent distance. Humanity had not walked away in rage. They had walked away in clarity. They understood their value even if the council had not, and they would not return to a place where that value had been dismissed. The council was alone now, facing the storm they had believed they could weather without humanity, beginning to understand too late just how much they had lost. 12 months after humanity's departure, the Krell homeworld fell. The evacuation was chaotic and incomplete. Billions escaped, but millions did not. Among the casualties was Counselor Thexnar, who had chosen to remain coordinating the defense until the end. The irony was not lost on anyone. The counselor who had initiated the vote to cut human funding had died, defending against a threat the council could not adequately fight without human systems. 23. More species requested emergency contact with humanity. All requests went through neutral intermediaries. All received the same response. Humanity would provide humanitarian aid. Refugee camps were being established just outside human borders. Medical supplies and food were available, but no military assistance would be offered. We will help you survive. We will not fight your war. The distinction was clear and painful. Humanity bore no hatred toward the council species, but they would not defend those who had dismissed them. The council had wanted independence from human military redundancy. They had it now. Refugee fleets began appearing at human borders in increasing numbers, thousands of ships carrying millions of displaced beings. The human response was systematic and efficient. They established safe zones and neutral space just outside their territory, relief stations with food, medical care, and temporary shelter. Human aid workers staffed these stations. They treated injuries, distributed supplies, and helped refugees contact surviving family members. But when the refugees asked for protection, for permission to settle in human space, for military intervention against the swarm, the answer was always the same. We will help you survive. We cannot fight for you. Some refugees understood. Others were angry. Many simply were grateful for any help at all. The human aid workers showed no judgment. They simply did their work with quiet efficiency. Saphira volunteered at one of these relief stations. She had taken leave from her council position, unable to continue working for an organization she now saw clearly as failed. She needed to do something useful. Helping refugees seemed like the only meaningful action available. She worked alongside human doctors and engineers. She watched them solve problems with practiced skill. She saw how they organized systems, maintained equipment, coordinated distribution. Everything they did worked smoothly. One evening, exhausted after a long shift, she sat with a human engineer named Dr. Sarah Chen. They shared a simple meal, looking out at the temporary shelters housing thousands of refugees. "Why do you do this?" Saphira asked. "Your people owe us nothing. We treated you terribly." "Why help?" Sarah was quiet for a moment. "Because they need help. Not the council. Not the governments. The people. individual beings who are suffering through no fault of their own. We cannot ignore that just because their leaders made bad decisions. But you could do more, Saphira pressed. Your military could help fight the swarm. We could, Sarah agreed. But why should we? To prove we are strong? To show we were right? We know our value. We do not need the Council's validation anymore. And we will not sacrifice our people to save governments that did not respect us. People will die. People are already dying. Sarah said quietly. That is the cost of the choice your council made. They decided human military power was redundant. They decided human systems were primitive. Actions have consequences. We will not protect you from the consequences of disrespecting us. The words were harsh but not angry, just factual. Saphira understood then the depth of what had been lost. Not just human assistance but human partnership. The council had broken something fundamental, and no amount of apologies could repair it. Back in council space, intelligence reports began revealing an uncomfortable truth. Human space had seen swarm activity. Multiple incursions had been detected near human colonies, but the swarm had never successfully attacked any human position. Sensor data was limited, but what existed was puzzling. Swarm fleets would approach human territory, then suddenly change course. Sometimes entire swarm formations would simply disappear from sensors. The pattern suggested active defense, but no major battles were being detected. Military analysts studied the data obsessively. How were the humans defending themselves so effectively? Were they using new weapons? New tactics? The Council fleet was suffering heavy losses in every engagement. But human space remained secure. One analyst proposed a disturbing theory. Perhaps humans were fighting the swarm, but not where the Council could observe it. Perhaps they were engaging swarm forces in deep space, preventing them from reaching human territory. While the Council struggled to coordinate defensive battles, humans might be conducting successful offensive operations. The idea seemed impossible. How could humanity manage offensive operations while the entire Council could barely hold defensive positions? But the evidence supported the theory. Human military coordination had never relied on Council systems. They had their own protocols, their own technology, their own way of operating, a way that apparently worked much better. Matriarch Velkos reviewed the intelligence reports with growing understanding. Humanity had not been maintaining Council military systems out of necessity. They had been helping, offering their superior coordination technology to less capable partners. When treated as redundant, they had simply stopped helping, and now the difference in capability was being revealed in the starkest possible terms. The Council fought desperately for survival. Innovations born of necessity began to appear. New coordination protocols were developed. Alternative supply chains were established. Species that had relied on human solutions were forced to find their own answers. Progress was slow and costly, but it was progress. The war continued. More worlds fell. More refugees fled. The Council's territory contracted steadily. But the complete collapse that had seemed inevitable began to stabilize. The Council was learning to stand on its own, though the lesson was being taught in blood. 14 months after humanity's departure, the Council received an unusual transmission. A damaged swarm ship had crashed on a border world. Recovery teams secured the wreckage. Analysis began immediately. What they found was shocking. Human weapon signatures, not on the wreckage itself but in the surrounding debris field. Energy patterns consistent with human plasma cannons. Residue from human missile systems. This swarm ship had been damaged in battle with human forces before crashing. Further investigation revealed more evidence. Analysis of swarm migration patterns showed gaps. Fleets that should have reached Council space based on their trajectories had simply vanished. Sensor ghosts in deep space suggested major battles that no one had witnessed. The conclusion was inescapable. Humanity had been fighting the swarm all along, not in defense of Council space. In defense of the region. They were intercepting swarm fleets before those fleets could reach either human or Council territory. Fighting a shadow war that protected everyone while taking credit for nothing. The revelation was crushing. While the Council struggled and blamed humanity for abandoning them, humans had been quietly protecting the entire sector, asking for no recognition, expecting no gratitude, simply doing what needed to be done because it was right. Matriarch Velkos presented the findings to the Council. The chamber was silent as the implications settled. For over a year they had cursed humanity's absence. They had called humans selfish for withdrawing. They had blamed them for council casualties. And the entire time, humans had been fighting, bleeding, dying, to protect worlds that had dismissed them as redundant. "We owe them an apology," someone said. "We owe them more than that," Velkos replied. "We owe them understanding we may never achieve." They walked away from us not in anger, but in dignity. They refused to fight for governments that disrespected them, but they never stopped protecting innocent lives. That is character we should have recognized from the beginning. The Council sent another message to humanity, not asking for military alliance, not requesting their return, simply acknowledging what had been discovered, thanking them for protection no one had asked them to provide. The response was brief. Ambassador Williams appeared on screen again, looking even more tired than before. "We do not need your thanks," he said. "We did not protect you for recognition. We did it because those swarm fleets would have killed billions of innocent beings, children who had no part in your council's decisions, families just trying to live their lives. We could not ignore that," he paused. "But understand this, we will never fight for your governments again. We will protect innocent lives because that is who we are. But you, your council, your leadership, you will never have our military backing again. You wanted to stand alone. You are standing alone. The fact that we are also fighting the swarm does not change that." The message ended. The distinction was clear. Humanity would protect the vulnerable, but they would not serve those who had disrespected them. The Council would have to win its war through its own strength, not through human strength they had taken for granted. Saphira sat in the refugee camp, watching human aid workers help another group of survivors. She finally understood the full scope of what humanity had become. Not vengeful, not petty, simply done with being used. They would help anyone who needed help, but they would never again serve anyone who did not respect them. 5 years after humanity walked out of the Council chambers, the Void Swarm War ended. The Council survived, but the cost was almost unbearable. 307 species were extinct. Their homeworlds consumed by the swarm, their colonies scattered, their cultures lost forever. 89 more species existed only as remnant populations, too few in number to rebuild their civilizations. Billions had died. Entire sectors of space were now dead zones, uninhabitable for generations. The final victory came through desperate innovation and terrible sacrifice. The Council had learned to fight without human systems. They had developed their own coordination protocols. They had built new supply chains. They had become self-sufficient through necessity and suffering, but the scars would never fully heal. Human space remained untouched. Not a single human world had fallen. The swarm had tried repeatedly to breach human defenses and failed every time. Sensor data and recovered swarm remains told the story. Humanity had fought a parallel war, engaging swarm forces in deep space with devastating effectiveness. Intelligence estimates suggested humans had destroyed nearly as many swarm ships as the entire Council fleet combined. They had done it with a fraction of the resources, a fraction of the casualties, and without anyone asking them to. The contrast was impossible to ignore. In the aftermath of the war, the Council tried to rebuild. Saphira had been promoted to senior analyst during the conflict. Now she worked on reconstruction efforts, helping coordinate the massive project of restoring galactic civilization. The work was overwhelming. Her team compiled reports on human involvement during the war. What they discovered was both humbling and painful. Human aid stations had saved millions of refugees. Human medical technology sold through neutral markets had treated countless wounded. Human agricultural systems shared freely with desperate worlds had prevented famines. And human military forces had engaged in hundreds of battles that the Council knew nothing about. Intercepting swarm fleets, destroying hive ships, protecting trade routes through neutral space. They had fought a shadow war protecting everyone while accepting recognition from no one. The question everyone asked was simple. Why? Why had humanity protected people who had dismissed them? Why fight for a galaxy that had disrespected them? The answer came from the most unexpected source. Ambassador Marcus Williams agreed to a final meeting. Not in the Council chambers. Those doors remained closed to him. But at a neutral station on the border between human and Council space. Representatives from every surviving species attended. Williams was old now, nearly 80. He moved slowly, supported by a cane, but his eyes were still sharp, his mind still clear. He sat before the assembled representatives and waited for their questions. Matriarch Velko spoke first, her telepathic voice gentle. Why did you protect us? After everything we did, everything we said, why did you keep fighting? Williams was quiet for a long moment. Because you could never see us, he finally said. Even now, discovering we fought the swarm, you think we did it for you. We did not. He gestured to the viewport showing the stars beyond. Do you know how many refugees found homes during the war? Children who would have died, who lived because we gave them shelter? Families torn apart, who were reunited at our aid stations? We did not measure our actions by what the Council deserved. We measured them by what innocent beings needed. The Council taught us a valuable lesson, Williams continued. Never mistake being needed for being respected. You needed us desperately, but you never respected us, and we will never forget that distinction. A Krell representative spoke up. What would it take for humanity to return to the Council? Nothing, Williams said simply. There is no negotiation, no concession you could offer, no apology that would be sufficient. You proved what you truly believed about us when you had the power to choose. We learned our value even if you did not, and we will never sit in those chambers again. But we have reformed, another representative said. New structures. Equal representation. We have learned from our mistakes. You learned from consequences, Williams replied. Not from respect. You changed because you were forced to, not because you wanted to. That is not growth. That is survival. The room was silent. Humanity will continue to trade with you, Williams said. We will maintain diplomatic contact through intermediaries. We will help refugees and provide humanitarian aid. But we will never be your partners again. You had 50 years to see our value. You chose not to. Now you will have to live with that choice. Saphira found her voice. What do we tell our children? The next generation who did not make these mistakes? Williams looked at her directly. Tell them the truth. Tell them that your council had partners who gave everything. Tell them those partners were dismissed, disrespected, and driven away. Tell them that actions have permanent consequences. Tell them that respect cannot be demanded after the fact. It must be given when it matters. He stood slowly, leaning on his cane. You will rebuild, he said. You are survivors. You proved that in the war. But remember this. Humanity did not destroy the Council. You just finally had to carry your own weight. And you were not ready. That failure is yours, not ours. Williams left the meeting. It was the last time he ever spoke to Council representatives. He retired to Earth and spent his final years teaching at a diplomatic academy, training the next generation of human ambassadors. His lessons focused on dignity, self-respect, and the importance of walking away from those who do not value you. The Council rebuilt over the following decades. New structures emerged. New species joined, learning from the mistakes of the past. The empty seats where human representatives once sat were preserved as a memorial, not to humanity but to the Council's own failure, a reminder of what they had lost through their own hubris. Humanity became known throughout the galaxy as the Hermit Kingdom, powerful, prosperous, but isolated by choice. They traded through neutral parties. They maintained peaceful relations with all species. But they never rejoined the galactic community they had once helped build. New species entering galactic society learned two histories. The official record spoke of the Void Swarm War, the Council's survival, the reconstruction, but there was another history, whispered in diplomatic circles, taught in academies, discussed in quiet conversations. The history of the species the Council lost. The partners who had been everything and had been treated as nothing. The engineers who had maintained civilization while receiving no credit. The defenders who had protected the innocent while accepting no recognition. The species who had walked away in silence and never looked back. Saphira spent her life working on Council reform. She became one of the most vocal advocates for recognizing and respecting contribution. She established protocols to ensure no species would ever again be systematically undervalued. Her work was celebrated throughout Council space, but she never forgot the lesson humanity had taught. You cannot repair trust after it is completely broken. You cannot demand respect after you have given disrespect. Some mistakes are permanent. In the Council chambers, tours would sometimes stop at the empty human seats. Guides would tell the story, how humanity had been present for 50 years, how they had contributed to every aspect of galactic civilization, how they had been dismissed and disrespected, how they had walked away and never returned. Young beings from every species would stand before those empty seats and absorb the lesson. Power is not just military strength or economic influence. Power is also the ability to walk away, to refuse participation in systems that do not respect you, to stand alone with dignity rather than compromise your value for acceptance. Humanity had taught the galaxy that lesson without ever intending to. They had simply lived it. Decades after the war, a human child named Maya stood on the observation deck of a station orbiting Mars. She was 7 years old, learning galactic history in school. She looked out at the stars, knowing that thousands of species lived out there, species her people traded with, helped, maintained peace with, but species they would never truly rejoin. She asked her teacher a simple question: "Why do we not go back to the council?" Her teacher, who had studied under Ambassador Williams himself, answered carefully, "Because they needed to learn to value what they had before they lost it. And we needed to learn to value ourselves enough to walk away when we were not valued." Both lessons were necessary. "But they apologized," Maya said. "Is that not enough?" "Some things cannot be fixed with apologies," her teacher replied. "Respect must be given freely, not extracted through desperation." They apologized because they were losing. That is not the same as respecting us when they had the choice. Maya looked back at the stars, trying to understand. She was young. The lesson would take time to fully comprehend. But she would learn it as every human child learned it. Dignity matters more than belonging. Self-respect matters more than acceptance. Walking away from disrespect is not weakness. It is strength. Out in the galaxy, the council continued its work. Debates happened in the crystalline chambers. Votes were cast. Decisions were made. The work of governing thousands of species continued, but the empty seats remained. A permanent reminder of what had been lost. Not through war or disaster, but through failure to recognize value when it was present.